Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the New Delhi segment of the Hindu Lit for Life 2013, presented by VGN and powered by VIT University. I'd especially like to extend a warm welcome to our distinguished speakers. We are delighted that you could join us this evening. I invite Nirmala Lakshman, Director, The Hindu, and the Lit for Life Festival Director to make her welcome remarks.
Good evening, and I'm very delighted to welcome you all to the Delhi session of Lit for Life, the Hindus' Festival of Literature. It's especially important for us that we begin this segment in Delhi, a city that is a favorite for many of us. We have recorded an impressive growth in our readership in Delhi and in the region. Especially the last quarter of 2012 has registered a remarkable growth, and I think many of our readers are here today. So we look forward to meeting our readers old and new, because we believe that platforms like this enable us to connect directly with our readers and hear what they have to say. So one of the purposes of Lit for Life is to make that direct connection. We do believe that we have a range of issues that we have had the opportunity to showcase from art and culture, and you saw that movie. Some of it displayed the kind of subjects that we dealt with last year and the year before. And this year too, I think we have an excellent range, and in Delhi we have a wonderful beginning with a serious discussion, we know, because given that there's a great deal of discussion in the public sphere about issues that concern our nation, such as the freedom of expression and the infringement of that, the increasing crime and violence against women. We have an excellent distinguished panel with Mrs. Jayanti Natarajan, Ms. Brinda Karat, Mr. Shankar Iyer, upon whose book the discussion is based, and Dr. Vivek Debroy, and Siddharth Varadarajan, the editor of The Hindu, will moderate that discussion. We believe that the forums like this are very important to take these questions forward, and regardless of the pressures that literary festivals often face, and book fairs included, we believe that we must engage with these issues, and we look forward to a very stimulating discussion. We really thank the panelists. We know how busy they are, for taking the time out to be with us this evening. We also have as our keynote speaker Mr. Steve McCurry, whose wonderful work has been viewed in National Geographic and in other forums. We know that he is probably the world's greatest photographer, and his iconic photographs have revealed his talent as an artist, a teller of tales, and an inveterate traveler. I understand he has come to India 85 times. We look forward to hearing him this evening, and we will, I'm sure, be spellbound by his presentation. He will be introduced by Mr. Dinesh Khanna, well-known photographer based in Delhi. This evening also, we will be presenting the shortlist of the Hindu Literary Prize for Best Fiction 2012. One of the panel of eminent judges, independent judges, who has kindly consented to be here and read and reveal the shortlist for us. This is Nilanjana Roy, and I look forward to hearing from her. I must at this point explain that the Hindu has no say at all in any of the judging process, and we really appreciate that the judges took several months and read through many books to come to their decision. We look forward to hearing from them. The final book, the winner of the Hindu Best Fiction Prize, will be announced at the festival in Chennai, which is going to be in the middle of February. I would also like to thank all our sponsors for their support, and to say that we have had a great festival is possible only because of that kind of support. I've had a great deal of expertise and inputs from our two literary consultants, Rachna Singh Davidar and Meeta Kapoor, who have put together this program for us. We also have our events people and our colleagues at the Hindu, and especially Kriti Sham, who've done a wonderful work and helped us to put this event together. I now request Lata Ganapati to take us through the evening. Thank you very much for being here, and I hope you have a memorable evening.
Thank you, Dr. Lakshman. Before we move on to the first session of the evening, we thank our festival consultants, Meeta Kapoor and Rachna Singh Davidar, for their phenomenal contribution towards the planning of Lit for Life 2013. Thank you, ladies. We could not have achieved this without you. A festival of this scale is impossible without the support of sponsors, whom we acknowledge with gratitude. Lit for Life is presented by VGN and powered by VIT University. Our associate sponsor is Shriram Chits. Official car partner is Volvo. Hospitality partner, the Leela Palace, Chennai. Our bookstore partner, Landmark. Radio partner, Chennai Live. And event partner, Aura. I request you to take a moment to keep your mobile phones on silent mode or to turn them off, please. Our first session this evening is Accidental India, an economic history of modern India. I would like to invite the distinguished speakers onto the stage. Shankar Iyer is the author of Accidental India, a history of the nation's passage through crisis and change. Mr. Iyer is an analyst, a public intellectual, and has been a journalist for nearly 3 decades. Brinda Karat is a former member of the Rajya Sabha and a member Brinda Karat is a former member of the Rajya Sabha and a member of the Communist Party of India Marxist Politburo. Currently, she's a member of the Central Executive of the Adivasi Adhikar Rashtriya Manch. Bibek Debroy is an economist and professor at the Center for Policy Research and a columnist with the Economic Times. He's currently working on the translation of the Mahabharata, of which 6 volumes have already been released. Jayanti Natarajan, a lawyer by training, is Union Minister of State for Environment and Forests and a member of Parliament in the Rajya Sabha, where she's a representative of Tamil Nadu. The session is moderated by Siddharth Varadarajan, the editor of The Hindu. Mr. Varadarajan is a trained economist and taught at New York University before turning to journalism. I now invite Siddharth Varadarajan to introduce the session.
Thanks a lot, Dutta. Can everybody hear me? No? Okay, yeah, that's clear. Right. Well, I'd like to add my welcome to everybody else as well. Everybody else is welcome. And plunge straight into the session. We don't have a lot of time. We have to pack in a lot in the next 45 minutes. And this session is loosely structured around the wonderful new book that Shankar Iyer has written, which is really one of a kind. If you want, it's a one-stop place if you want to understand some of the major changes that have happened in the Indian economy, particularly the kind of structural shifts at key turning points over the last 3 decades. I can't think of a better place where you will get all the information, analysis, and background that you require, not all of which you may agree with, but as a reference point, I think it's indispensable. And I think let's start the discussion with Shankar giving us a brief PowerPoint, the key ideas in the book, so that readers who may not know, or members in the audience who may not know the contents can familiarize themselves. Thanks.
Good evening. The object of this presentation, which would be not more than 5 minutes, I hope, is to establish the ancestry of change in independent India and why we are asking today why crisis is a permanent prefix for change. A good place to start would be the India Story 2013, where every second there are new mobile subscribers joining the mobile network. Every minute, 20 motorcycles are sold. Every hour, 200 cars are sold. Every day, 2,000 flights land and take off. And every year, of course, we buy 800 tons of gold. This transformation from pathos to the promise of prosperity seems orderly and to some even ordained. Truth is, transformation has been accidental. And India has lurched from crisis to crisis every decade in the last 65 years. Have you ever wondered why change is often described as a revolution in India? Because it takes forever to get here. Let us look at the 7 changes which took decades and transformed India. The Green Revolution. India suffered multiple famines and was dependent on imports for food grains. The obvious focus in 1947 should have been agriculture. It wasn't. The argument then was that this would enrich the rich farmers. So we muddled around for 20 years and finally faced the shame of being tagged as a ship-to-mouth economy before we changed trajectory. When Dr. C. Subramaniam led and pushed the Green Revolution, every party in India, including his own, opposed the Green Revolution. Bank nationalization. This was driven by a political and an economic crisis. It came into confluence, actually. Savings were controlled by big business houses who owned the banks. Mrs. Gandhi was in a battle with the syndicate. India needed funds to finance its plans. Mrs. Gandhi needed political capital. She democratized capital and nationalized her hold on politics. The milk revolution. I could sum it up in just one name, Dr. Verghese Kurian. In 1954, he produced a model for successful milk production. The planners ignored him. And mind you, at that point in history, India was importing nearly 70% of its milk products. In 1964, Lal Bahadur Shastriji asked chief ministers to promote the national milk grid, but nobody did nothing. Till 1970, when faced with rising demand, a fiscal crisis, and dumping by European nations, the government relented and allowed Dr. Kurian to convert milk aid into venture capital to set up the National Dairy Development Board. India is today the largest producer of milk. Midday meal schemes. We know today that midday meals help enrollment, boost literacy. The idea was known to Kamaraj in 1956. MGR evangelized this idea in a very big way in 1982. But it wasn't until a Supreme Court order in 2001 that the idea went national. Software revolution. We like to call ourselves the IT giant. We could have done this many decades back. In 1964, Dr. Homi Bhabha identified hardware and software as the areas of core competency for India. We missed the hardware bus, and as we all know, Korea and Taiwan got onto that bus. We would have missed the software bus also. Till 1990, software developers were denied computers, connectivity, travel dollars. It was only in 1990 when Nagaraj Vittal, then the DOE secretary, produced a viable business model. He was empowered, of course, by the foreign exchange crisis that followed. And therefore, we are now the software giants. Liberalization, this is a story everybody seems to be familiar with, and therefore there are many myths. Many would like us to believe that liberalization was voluntary. That is really contextual autism. The architect of reforms was the crisis of 1991. And the blueprint for the reforms came with the bailout from the lenders. In fact, the first draft of the new industrial policy, the dismantling of the license raj that we talk about today, was written in May 1990, but it was shelved by the government. It was only in January 1991, when India was negotiating with the IMF, that this same report was dusted and produced as a promissory note when the lenders questioned our intent. If you're really looking for an architect of that reforms, it would be Narasimha Rao. And he, like a good Machiavelli that he was, deployed disruption to consolidate his hold. Rti Revolution. As early as in 1975, the Supreme Court declared that the right to information was implicit in the right to expression. Yet it took 30 years, several agitations by people on that slide there, for RTI to become reality. Again, it was an intervention by the Supreme Court. So have we changed? Not very much. Crisis is back. For 24 months, GDP growth was sliding, debt was rising. Government borrowings rose from rupees 200 crore a day in 2004 to 1600 crores a day in 2012. But it didn't matter till the rating agencies threatened to junk rate India. Suddenly there is a flurry of motion, and of course there is some moment. The economy has got the attention, but what about the many silent crises that we face? Let me wrap up, like I started with numbers, I want to wrap up with some numbers. Every 10 minutes a woman dies in childbirth in India. Every hour 200 children die of malnutrition. Every day 40 or nearly 40 farmers commit suicide. 6 out of 10 Indians depend on agriculture and live off 1/6 of the national income. A quarter of the population doesn't have electricity. Over 400 million people live below the poverty line. And 800 million people do it out in the open every day because they live without sanitation. The lament about India really is not what it could not do, but what it could but did not do. Thank you.
Thanks, Shankar, for that summary. I hope members of the audience have got some idea of the way the book's argument has been structured. When I said that this session will be loosely based on the book, what I thought we could do is to actually go beyond the narrative that you have outlined in the book and the structure there, and to actually to discuss what lessons the last 50 or 60 years offer us today. And it seems to me that if I were to run through the list of turning points that you mentioned, with the exception of the RTI, which was clearly the product of a movement from below, and which the government and the establishment of the day resisted for long before finally succumbing and agreeing to it. Even now, efforts are always on to somehow undermine this right in one way or the other. The rest of the decisions that you have outlined appear to be technocratic, or decisions taken at the point of a gun, virtually, if you look at, say, what happened in '91, or decisions taken by stealth, or some combination of these. What is your reading of the economic history of the last 40 years tell you about the importance of democracy in economic decision making?
Well, before I say anything about democracy, I would like to say one thing is that it seems through my readings now that in India things have to get worse for them to get better. And there is a peculiar problem with the way we decide things, the way Indians are over-invested in processes and under-invested in processes and outcomes. So throughout history, you see a lot of promise. We've had a program for malnutrition for 25 years. We spend about 1,50,000 crores in every 5-year plan, but we don't seem to make, I mean, life expectancy for a child is better in Guatemala and Iraq. There is a problem with the outcomes that we manage. So we are not focused on outcomes. The other thing is about discourse that happens in India. The discourse is very fractured. Politicians do what is electorally profitable. Bureaucrats do what is convenient because they don't want to disrupt the status quo. And people in India tend to accept what is morally satisfying. So corruption means a Lokpal bill. Basically, corruption is a huge issue. It is not a unidimensional issue. It is not about a law, but it has a supply side and it has a demand side. So the discourse that we need to have doesn't happen. And I think that's probably the centerpiece of the issue here.
I want to come back to corruption later because that's obviously an issue that animates a lot of people. But yeah, Brinda. Yeah. I think it's on. It's on.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay. No, I think that's a very important point you've made about the interaction or the influence of democratic structures and our politics on economics. I think that is very critical. And I think what is of great concern to me is the fact that as we are taking forward what I consider a neoliberal agenda started from the 1990s, which Shankar has described as coming out of the crisis of the 1991. And of course, his understanding is that it was accidental that this happened. While I agree that, crisis can always present opportunity for change, and very often crisis does, in fact, lead to change, I certainly don't think there's anything accidental about it. I think that it was a very clear agenda which had been set out internationally, and India was following that. But anyway, we can have different interpretations of that. But I believe that as far as democracy is concerned, one of the critical problems that we are facing with the economic policies being followed today is precisely the deficit growing in democracy and democratic functioning. We find that many of the decisions which should be taken by Indian Parliament are already determined by the unequal global financial sector and the relations, the international relations, which are unequal as far as a country like India is concerned. I mean, what is happening in many of the European countries, for example, they're being forced to accept a path of development which may not suit them. So therefore, I believe the neoliberal framework itself is intrinsically inimical to democracy, democratic functioning, and the economic and political sovereignty of nations, and I believe the Indian experience only strengthens that. Just another very quick point, which is that, the trajectory policies in Shankar's book, why I find it so interesting, and I was telling Shankar also a bit conflicted as far as what are the solutions he is offering? Is he offering any solutions at all? Because he very passionately speaks about the huge inequalities which are growing in India, the figures that he gave at the end. I think that is a profile of how the dominant trends in Indian economic policies are in fact creating more and more social inequalities, which I believe are just totally opposite to what democracy should mean. After all, democracy means more access. Democracy means more equity. Democracy means the elimination of poverty. I don't think that's what we're getting today.
Do you see, I mean, you are in Parliament, you're a minister, you've been associated with the Congress Party for many years, and you've seen the inner workings of the political establishment, as it were. Do you feel today in your domain, or in the domains that you're familiar with, that there are other players that have a greater say in decision making than the electorate? In other words, are there other forces that are constantly operating that have managed to get decisions taken, which, in other words, are we dealing with the era of unequal citizens? And some citizens manage to have a much greater say, when it comes to decision making.
I think there are always, to straight away, first of all, well, I suppose I'd have to answer what you're asking first. Yes, I think that in any democracy, there are always, I wouldn't call them stakeholders, there are always a large number of voices, lobbies, people who want to influence the system, who want to influence the entire process of policy making. And I believe that in an open democracy like India, or any democracy, I believe that it is but natural. I mean, I don't believe that we can actually expect anything else. But are decisions taken? Clearly not. I mean, I would never agree that any government, how many elections, how many governments has the Congress not been a part of? I mean, if you look at Shankar's entire book, which I have, I'd like to confess, I haven't read word for word. I've glanced through it pretty intensively. But you can either look at the glass and say that this is half empty or half full. And if you say, and I've been, as you know, a member of the Congress for many years, as has my family, and we've gone up, and I believe passionately in the goals of the Congress, the ideas of the Congress. I'm saying all this for a reason. And most of the governments that have led independent India, except for brief interregnum, have been Congress. So you can either say that all the achievements that India has seen, and to me the greatest achievement of all is the fact that we are still an open democracy, is because of the Congress, or you could say that all the failures, you know, all the figures that Shankar pointed out are because of the Congress. Well, I prefer to see the glass as half full, or more than half full. And I would like to say that obviously, I agree with a couple of the things that Brinda said, that I don't think liberalization, quote unquote, was accidental in any way. I think it was a thought-out process. I obviously won't use the word neoliberal, but the first issue I have with what Shankar is saying is, he says everything is accidental. I don't agree with that at all. Change, is crisis precipitates change. Is it? Yes, it does. But is it unique to India? No. I think crisis always precipitates change anywhere in the world. And I think it's also unfair, and this is a short point I wish to make before you hand over the floor to Vivek Debroy, that in a family or in a country, I don't know if one size can fit all, or whether we can, and what Shankar suggests, why we haven't found the solutions, endemic to end the endemic problems that we have. Because one size template cannot fit all, and in a multi-layered society like ours, I think everybody has to have a voice. It is chaotic, it takes a long time, and that is the way it should be. It's a multi-structured polity. And no government, and certainly not our government, would ever be influenced by, they may be influenced in some ways, but at the end of the day, I would argue we are accountable to the people. Not that a vote justifies everything, but we are accountable. The sunlight is upon us, the Right to Information Act is upon us, and I believe ultimately decisions do get taken in the public good.
Shankar, you want to come back on the accidental issue before I come to Vivek?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point. I'm not saying that the events are accidental or the change. What I'm saying, the transformation of India is accidental because it is forced by crisis. Bertolt Brecht once says things will not be the same because the way they are. But in India, actually it is Newton's law which works. Things will be inertia till an external force acts on them. India is the only country which has the unique position of being able to stare at the problem and the solution simultaneously and wait for a crisis to come. So I'm not saying that the events are accidental. I'm saying the transformation that we see today is accidental. Between 1956, when the second plan was written, and 1991, there is a tome of stuff, starting from Rajaji till T.N. Srinivasan and others, who have said that license Raj was disastrous for India. That in the 70s, we had a growth rate worse than Malawi. That is what caused, we produced a unique phrase called the Hindu rate of growth. All this happened, and we still didn't dismantle this because it suited the political parties and it also suited the business houses.
Let me challenge Siddharth. Allow me to challenge him for 1 second. Shankar himself says in his book about the Obama movement, how the structural solutions were engineered, don't you? And about the economic crisis in the United States. At that time, the Federal Reserve allowed that easy tap of liquidity to keep flowing until there was a huge economic crisis in India. Whereas it's a fact that the Reserve Bank governor of that time in India in 2008 to whom Shankar refers to in other contexts in his book, actually hardened the interest rates and tightened up the economic situation in India, so that the crisis was not felt as deeply in India.
Okay.
So we do respond to situation.
Right.
It's not that we stare at the solution and at the crisis at the same time.
Vivek, it's inevitable in a discussion of this kind that we would constantly seek reference points or relate the economic history that Shankar has outlined to what's happening in present-day India. And it seems to me that where the book perhaps doesn't do justice is in acknowledging, perhaps only in passing, some of those decisions that were taken in the 50s and 60s, Mahalanobis, planning, public sector, investment in various institutions of higher learning, without which perhaps none of the benefits that one has been able to harvest from opening up the economy might have materialized in the same way. And similarly, if we look at today's debates on the crisis in the economy, it was fashionable till a few months ago, before Chidambaram began to announce all these decisions on diesel, etc. But it was quite common to hear in the media and among sort of the Chatterati and so on, that this is a government that's not taking decisions, that there's a policy paralysis, implying that somehow the discussion on corruption and all of these things has had a harmful effect on decision making. I heard many people tell me that joint secretaries are not signing files. And after hearing all of this stuff, there was a story that we're working on. In fact, a whistleblower from a certain government department came to me and said how in her nodal ministry, all kinds of terrible decisions were being taken in violation of the law to benefit one or two private houses. And this was after the Raja episode, after various people have gone to jail, after this so-called policy paralysis is set in. The ability for private sector and for ministers and others to get rent, to generate rent from the so-called free market economy, seems to have increased manifold. The scale of corruption that we're talking about associated with two. So what explains this paradox that we've moved away from license permit Raj in the hope that this will, you'll have market determined prices and so on and so forth, and this will reduce corruption, but there seems to have been an explosion in the volume of corruption. How do you, how do we answer this or resolve this paradox?
Well, thank you, but before answering your question, I'd like to step back a bit, and I'd like to also suggest that we do not get bogged down in the semantics. And the reason I'm focusing on the word semantics is because of two words that Shankar uses. One is accidental and the other one is crisis. Shankar is a friend, and I'm one of the privileged ones in this gathering who's read the book before it was published and discussed it when it was being conceived. And I'm unhappy with the use of both words, and Shankar knows this, of both words, accidental and crisis. I don't think the crisis argument can be very convincingly advanced with the exception of 1991. To a lesser extent, perhaps the Green Revolution, but 1991. Notwithstanding Newton's laws of motions and then the external force, and Vrinda Karat will say emanating from Washington.
Absolutely right. You just took my next line away from me.
The accidental part is again not quite what the book is about. What the book is about, and those 7 case studies substantiated, is about a lethargy in decision making. And part of it is linked to the democratic process. So change, therefore, is not instantaneous, it's not overnight, it takes a while. That's what really those 7 case studies establish. But there is something that Shankar has not probed, except in the introduction, where there's a passing reference to that. And that is about the role of the state. What should the state be doing in India? And that's where the debate ought to be about. That's where perhaps he will write his next book about. And this is not just about inequality and issues and inclusive growth and issues like this. It is whether the economic role of the state as laid down in the Constitution is what we want it to be. B, if we want it to be that, has that delivery happened in terms of the three main organs of the state laid down in the Constitution, the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. Now that's really the book. So far as your direct question is concerned, yes, there is crony capitalism, but yes, there is crony socialism also. Is it the case that reforms necessarily reduce corruption? And yes, a large part of the corruption is linked to electoral issues. Beyond that, much of the corruption is linked to discretion and abuse of discretion. Is it necessarily true that reforms eliminate scope for discretion? The answer is not really. They do eliminate scope for discretion in the petty kind of corruption. But for the big ticket corruption, not necessarily. It sort of transforms itself from lobbying and rent seeking in industrial licenses to plenty of lobbying and discretion in the allocation of natural resources.
Policies governing their use and all these kinds of things, exactly. I mean, this is, no, but in a way, this brings us to, I mean, again, sticking to the frames, the 7 episodes, each of those can be related to some kind of deficit or crisis, shortage, food deficit, shortage of milk, credit problems relating to the banking sector and so on. Today, it seems to me, and Brinda and Jayanti may disagree with me on this, that we are looking at a representational deficit, in the sense that the kind of people who are managing, maybe you won't disagree with me, the kind of people who are managing to get into parliament. If you, and Sainath has plotted some of these, the growth of assets of MPs, MLAs, is somewhere down the road, I mean, when you're saying corruption is linked to the electoral system, etc. So the elite always had ways of using MPs and MLAs to get various things done. But the speed with which some of them are entering the actual portals of decision making is something that I think is impoverishing Indian democracy.
You know what I think, frankly, in this is, I think there's an overemphasis on our politicians and politician bashing. I'm not saying that many of us don't deserve it. Please don't get me wrong. But I think when we do concentrate on this, we miss out on an extremely important aspect, which is corporate corruption. And, we have an advisor of the government of India saying that, you can actually legalize corporate corruption by saying that the giver of the bribe need not be, punished, but the taker can be. And who is the giver of the bribe? I mean, who is it today? And that's why I think Ashish Nandi was so totally wrong, because what he was saying was, in fact, completely concealing and covering up massive corporate corruption which exists in India today, and I think across the world. And therefore, I think that this whole discourse, "Arey license Raj to bahut kharab tha, arey license Raj kharab tha," today what is happening in your most basic essential services today, when you've allowed the corporates full freedom, what is happening, for example, in the pharma sector? You have, multinational companies, big companies coming in. There's absolutely no regulation in the pharmaceutical sector. So today you have a situation where the second, most critical part of debt on Indians is because of health services. And it's precisely because you have a totally unregulated drug sector. So I believe, in fact, one of the great lessons of the global crisis, we haven't learnt it. I think Obama learnt it first, followed by many of the other developed countries. People like my friend here, Vivek, still living in, a pre-crisis situation where he's still not understanding the role of the state. The role of the state is not just to bail out corporates, which is what the state is being used for today. A role of the state must be for an equitable distribution of national resources. And that is what people like Vivek are dead against. So my point is, when we talk about corruption, remember, the focus in the spotlight must be on big-ticket corruption, which can only occur today because of corporates. Politicians, bureaucrats, yeah, there is an excess. I agree with that.
Yeah.
Name them, shame them, arrest them, jail them. But, you know, you know, don't forget who the giver is and who is the driver. And the driver is embedded in this whole framework. अरे पहले तो एक license के लिए पैसे देते थे. Now whole ministries are being sold.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, let's face it. I mean, if you want, we can name it. What's happening with civil aviation? I mean, Jayanti knows she was a minister once, and at that time it was totally and utterly different. Today it's different. The whole framework, the policy framework allows this sort of thing to happen.
I mean, we've seen,
So
in fact,
I'm not
ministers and ministries
allowing
allowing public sector units that are under their charge to actually wither and atrophy.
that's all my point
No,
is, you know, don't conceal really, you know, what is happening.
No, it's linked, right?
Because of the
I mean, the
economic
person who allows, no,
policies. I mean,
it's-
I'm not defending
No,
corrupt
Brinda, it's linked, right? The
politicians.
person who allows...
Natwarji is here, he knows. he is victim to many other strong global
Listen,
factors
I know-
which played a big role in what was
Brinda,
happening in foreign policy.
No, the two are linked, right? The person who allows, say, Air India to wither is also somebody who is very happy that Jet or some other airline prospers. Similarly, in the oil and gas sector.
See, this, what Brinda is saying is a very important issue. Clearly, our government, I'll have to say it for, you know, for the record and because, no, and I believe that nobody can allow, we have, who is it who said that it is the harsh light of sunlight which is the best disinfectant? Everything is out there in the open. Here Brinda's talking about something. Let's argue about it on some other forum. I'm not here to hold a brief for the Minister for Civil Aviation. I'm merely making a larger point that in today's India, you write about it, Brinda can talk about it, whoever is accused will defend it, and people will judge. And yes, if somebody is corrupt, name them, shame them, jail them. You have to, you should. It is our duty. But I want to make some other point. I want to say that in a sense, we are only covering the sexy issues. We are only talking about civil aviation or something, you know, no, not you, no, I didn't mean what you were saying. It was a very important point, what you made, Brinda. I totally agree that the giver is as much responsible as the taker, and it all starts because the corporates want to make it move faster, and I want to make another point in addition to what you made, which is, yes, but you know, and I'm sorry, I'm sure none of you are going to clap for this. But every politician gets kicked out once in 5 years. And yes, they get elected sometimes through undemocratic means, and the election does not immediately cleanse them of the corruption. But there is a whole large sector behind the politician, the entire bureaucratic machinery, which doesn't come out in the open at all. I would name the ministers on one finger, on the fingers of one hand, who have complete control over their ministries.
Go on then.
I would name them, no. I'm not falling for that one.
Jayanti, this is off the record.
I'm not
off
falling
the
for that one. Often before the file reaches the minister, the decisions are already taken. So, you know, I'm saying it's a policy. It's the policies that the ministers decide, but we stand up. I'm not running away from a responsibility. I'm saying that it's a multi-layered polity. There are levels and levels. But my point, my limited point that I wish to make, apart from agreeing that whoever, you know, large corruption, selling of natural resources, it's everybody's duty to find out, to write about it, to report it, to have them punished, make sure they're punished. But what about the other issues of corruption? What about corruption that you see every day? I have friends, middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, who say, I can't get a ration card. What about the public distribution system? What about the corruption that hits life every day? I mean, we don't ever talk about those issues of corruption, and that I think is so much more pitiful than this kind of corruption on which newspaper, and I want to add a final point, Siddharth, and I want to place this issue directly, squarely on the table, except for the Hindu, who's invited me here today. How many newspapers are owned by business houses? How many times have I been told that you better watch out, you better clear this thing? Because otherwise, so-and-so is going to be writing news about you that's not so good. And how many times I have to confess, I have to think about it. And I have to say, well, never mind, let them write. After all, I haven't done something wrong. So if the news and the generation of news passes into private hands with business interests, how does a politician like me, how do I survive?
I think you made a very valid point, and the problem has gotten even worse because of this cancer known as paid news, which has made inroads, all across, which is, has to be fought. But I want to just come back to Shankar. I think, as I said, it's inevitable that we come back to modern, today's issues. Corruption looms large. It has seemed to me, somewhat naively, I suppose, after the 2G scam burst, and and then you had this movement for Lokpal and so on, that in a way, our policymakers were, and even the corporate sector, were gearing up to turn a new leaf and to start doing things differently. The jury's still out on whether that's actually going to happen or not. I personally don't believe, I'm not optimistic anymore. But it seems to me that if we were to be in a position to actually deal with corruption properly, in a increasingly market-oriented economy, you have to have proper independent regulators, watchdogs. And what alarms me is that an institution like the CAG being run down when it points to certain problems with, certain wrong ways in which decisions were taken or money was spent. You have a concerted attack by the government on the CAG. The government doesn't pay too much attention to ensuring strong regulatory bodies or mechanisms. There's virtually many of these regulators get captured by the companies that they're regulating. Do you think that this is, in the next 10, 15 years of India's political economy, this is one issue that we absolutely have to get right?
Well, obviously, and the beginning has to be made at the germination point. Everybody tends to think that corruption is a supply side issue. There's a guy who wants something done, so he gives it. There is also a demand side to politics. I have two ladies here who belong to two different political parties. And I can't say anything about the left parties because I am not fully aware or enlightened about the level of corruption there. But we do know of several corruption cases in the other parties. And Jayanti, this is not specific to Congress. How do politicians fund their parties? In Gujarat, assembly seat, candidates were spending 6 crores a seat. Who's funding it? Where is this money come from? So there is a demand side to politics. So unless we address this very critical issue of how politics will be funded, and how we take it from there. So you cannot look at these issues in isolation, which is why I say that everybody is very struck by a Lokpal, strong Lokpal, bring us martial law administrator to fix corruption. But a law is simply a cleverly arranged cascade of words which is dead on arrival unless implemented. That election commission.
No, how are NGOs funded? How are journalists funded? How are newspapers funded? How are think tanks funded? Everything is now.
I think basically the issue of electoral reforms is very much on the agenda.
He raises a valid point. 6 crore is a conservative amount. In Punjab, it may be 10 or 12.
It's true.
In Tamil Nadu, a very popular candidate lost the election in Madurai. I'm not going to name who won, but that person, but that person, the people who worked for the candidate who lost, who passed away recently, mentioned to me that for vegetarians, a liter of milk, and for non-vegetarians, half a kilo of mutton was being sent to every voter.
That's such an underestimate of what was actually happening. Come on, Shankar. So you think half a liter of milk is going to get you votes in Tamil Nadu? Forget it.
So I'm coming to.
Listen, electoral reforms is critical.
But
Electoral reforms is a very critical
It's a valid
agenda,
point.
and it's a very valid point, but you cannot say we need electoral reforms and then you cannot damn all laws and say, "Arey, Lokpal is what? It's an extra marsh." No, you need laws, you need institutions, and there is a very strong case for electoral reform in India today.
Right.
It's very, very true.
The people are flashing these time cards so at me. So I'm going to, Vivek, you haven't had much of a say, so I'm going to pull you in to have the last word. You've been characterized in a certain way. If you want to respond to Brinda, or if you want to.
I said my friend Vivek. I mean, he's not going to object to that, unless he wants to, that is.
Well, I'm used to being misrepresented by people on the left. So I will restate what I said earlier, and I will explain why it needs a restatement. When I said we need to rethink the role of the state, that's not purely in economic terms. What we want a state in India to do, we'd want a state in India to focus on the social sectors. I don't think there would be any disagreement about that. Who delivers those social sector outcomes? The state governments do, the local bodies do, the panchayats do. So the right question to ask is not whether the ministry is being sold to a corporate or not, but do we really need that ministry? Do we need that ministry sitting here in Delhi or the government department sitting here in Delhi? If it exists, it will abuse its discretion. No. In that particular, yeah, of course. You give me,
if you take environment.
No, there you go.
No, if
I'm not talking about
That's not glass half full.
Vivek,
That
look
is
at
glass
this.
doesn't
It's a wrap.
exist.
She flashed that the time is up, but I just let me.
No, Siddharth, quickly.
How can you say
do
you
you
I will
need
defend-
a
I
rural?
will
mean
defend-
hand over the government
No,
to
that's
whom?
what I'm saying.
No, I'm going to make Jayanti happy.
Yeah.
Do
You
you
want
need a
to
rural
hand over the
development ministry?
government?
No, I was going to do the same
Do
thing.
you need a rural
One
development
minute,
ministry
I
in the
tell
center?
You want to hand over the government? You want to hand over to the government to only those who are economically powerful. That is basically what is going to happen. You want to use the government only to give subsidies to the rich.
Are you misinterpreting
to
me
give-
again?
No, no, no. This is
Or
what
is
you
that
said.
your own view?
This is what you have said.
No,
you have said
no,
all
no.
social welfare related ministries should wind up
No.
and leave it to the
up at the-
panchayats. I mean,
No.
come on, the whole
No.
It's a,
No.
hang on.
No.
I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to exercise my
Please play it
my
back.
rights as a.
No,
as
no,
a
one last
moderator.
question for both Brinda
no,
and
the-
Jayanti.
but-
No, one question
all
for
right, go ahead.
both Brinda
Listen,
and
we're
Jayanti.
on your side
No,
in
no.
the book. We
Yeah, yeah.
bought it.
Both. Do you need a rural development ministry in Delhi? Do you need a health ministry in Delhi? Do you need a primary education ministry in Delhi? Do you need an urban development
I
ministry
think we
in
do
Delhi?
personally, but I'm
If
sure
you need
that-
India in,
Definitely
Why
not.
not transfer these powers to the states and to the panchayats and to the municipal
do
government?
you need a country called India? I mean, it has to be the same
no, I
for the
think-
whole
I think,
country.
Rural development.
of course you need it.
critical ministry.
Brinda, I'm going to have to stop there in the sense that I think,
what is
I mean, a
this?
number of provocative questions have been thrown up. To my mind, it seems that whatever has been accomplished on the economic front and whatever remains to be accomplished cannot be done without the state playing a very, very important role. Obviously, the private sector and NGOs and everybody has a role to play, important role to play. But unless the state is there to in a way, oversee and to set a direction, particularly for those sectors where the private, those areas where the private sector is not going to spend the money, whether it's healthcare, whether it's even primary education, for example. These are all, in your book you talk about emerging water crisis. I mean, there are lots of areas where state intervention and public policy. Let me use that phrase, which is non-controversial. Enlightened public policy, which emerges from a deliberative process that involves a largest possible number of people, as opposed to being generated by Boston Consulting or some other consulting group or some corporate. That's the way that we need to go, I think, because many we've confronted choices that we've had in the past. And there are many more difficult choices that we're going to stare at us in the future. And I think it's only on the basis of this kind of enlightened public policy, produced through an enlightened and informed citizenry, that we're going to be able to muddle our way through the next few decades. So with these observations, I really, Jayanti, you're reaching for the mic
I'm saying,
in a
besides,
menacing
who
sort
will
of
you
way.
abuse if we are not around?
Right. So with those observations, I'd like to thank our panel and thank all of you for listening. Thank you.
With that, ladies and gentlemen, we come to the conclusion of the first session. I would like to thank all our speakers for their participation in today's festival.